everyone, through here, welcome to today's presentation. So in today's presentation, we are going to look at how to create AMC tables for any Talend version to any database. If you're not familiar with AMC, AMC stands for the Activity Monitoring Console, which is a logging database or a logging capability that Talend provides as we build jobs and workflows within the Talend environment. So we're going to dive in, create a couple of jobs, and see how easy it is to create the AMC tables right from within our Talend job. So that said, we're going to switch over to Studio here. The database, the tables I'm going to create would be residing in a MySQL database. So assuming you have a MySQL database or any database for that matter, any relational database for that matter, and we need to create those table objects in here. So in this case, I want to create those tables to show up within this particular database, the tutorials database. So I'm going to have those objects sitting in here, the AMC objects. Now, there are really three objects that we need for AMC. One which is the log catcher, the flow meter, and you have the stats catcher. All right, if you're not familiar with those, I'm gonna go through them as we go through the presentation. So let's start with give it the job name, create AMC tables. So this is a job we're gonna use to create those AMC tables. Now we have a blank canvas in here. Before we start building a job, the very first thing that we want to do is to establish a connection to the database, to that destination database where we need those tables to reside. So I'm going to go ahead, go into my database connections. So we're going to create a new database connection. So since I'm doing this for the first time, I wouldn't call it AMC. I'll just call it tutorials because I'm going to have to reuse this database over and over again. All right, so I'll call it tutorials DB. So give it a name. Ideally, you want to give it a purpose, a description. Go ahead, click next. That database is on MySQL. So this is on MySQL, which I showed a little bit earlier. So in that case, we want to go ahead from here, make sure we select MySQL from the dropdown, and then put in the necessary credentials in here. In this case, I'm going in with root. The password I'm going to be using, I can just simply put that in. Server is locally on my machine, so it's a local host. And the particular database in case that we need in this case is called tutorials. So I want to get the name exactly the same. So tutorials. All right, everything else looks the same. Let's go ahead and test this connection. All right, so connection to the MySQL database is successful. And if you're using a different database, say Oracle or SQL Server or any one of the different databases that we might have on the list, you're following the same process to establish that connection. Now, once your connection is established, we're going to take advantage of this connection now to create those AMC tables that we can use within the job. All right, so I have my database connection. Now, the next piece that we need is to actually put in the components within this job that we created here to actually create those tables. There are ways of doing it where you might, write the create table scripts, and it could get really challenging very quickly. And this approach I'm showing here would be a quick and easy way to get this done. So if we go over, so now that we have the database connection established, we're going to take advantage of this database connection now to create the job that actually creates the AMC tables for us. So to do that, I'm going to go back into my job designs area, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new job. Give it a name, AMC, create AMC tables. I think I had something very similar to that existing. So create AMC tables. And that just gives us a blank new job in the canvas. Now, there are a couple of things that we're going to require for this job to be created. The components that we need, if we go into the palette area and we select under logs and errors, we're going to find in here a couple of components that are needed. So one of them being the flow meter, the next one being the log catcher, and the last but not least being the stats catcher. So these are the three components that we need to create the three AMC tables that are needed. And those AMC tables, once we create them, should reside within this tutorial database. So right now, if we do a refresh, we can see that there is no table, those tables don't exist. But once we bring this, what we're going to notice, say, for example, with the flow meter is if we click on edit schema, this is the schema object that we need to create within that database. So depending on what database you're using, this is the schema we need. You can certainly hand code this and write the create statement, but we want to do this in a very easy fashion. So that's it. We're going to go back, bring our connection to the screen, the connection we just created. And in this case, we are not going to do output. We want to do a create table. So we want to create table in that case. All right. So now I'm going to just simply rename that to say flow meter. All right. And you can give any name that you want in here. Make a copy of that 3 times. So in here, I'll have a flow meter. And for this one, I would have logs. And last but not least, I'll have my statistics. So it's always good to just give a good name for that. So now, how do we get the schema over here? We can simply just connect these 2 components because it's not going to work, right? This is an independent component with no input. So if I select this component and I look at the schema, it's currently blank. So I need that schema over here so I can actually create that table. So the very first thing that we do here is give it the name of the table that we want to create. And that name is flow meter. So that's what we want the name of the table to be created, because this particular component just simply creates a table for us. Now we have the name of the table. Next thing we need is a schema. Like I mentioned a little bit earlier, the schema here is empty. So we need to grab a schema for that. All right. We can create table if it doesn't exist, drop table if it exists, and create. Let's just go ahead and create a table. We're running this just one time. So to get that schema, we go back here to the flow meter catcher, which is why we brought it on the screen, and I'll edit schema. And then what we can do here is we can go ahead, Control A, and select all the columns that we need in here. And if you come here, you can see copy selected items. So I'm just going to go ahead, copy selected items. Now I have that on the clipboard. I'll go back in here to my flow meter component, edit schema, and what you will notice here is paste. So I can go ahead and paste that. All right, so now I have that schema for this table. All right, and I can go now and disable this particular component because I don't need that anymore. All right, so it seems to be having an issue there. We'll come back and fix that in a little bit, but let's just repeat this. Copy the schema for this, repeat that 3 times, copy, paste. All right, so now we have that repeated 3 times. We can go ahead and disable each of those previous components. All right, but we need to do some fixing in here. So we want to make sure that the name that we had is flow meter. I think I need to change the name here, give it as logs. Sometimes you can call it log catcher if you really want to, but I just like to keep it short. So call it logs. So we want to create table, and the schema, we've updated that. And then last but not least, we want to do stats. So for the statistics. All right. So we can go ahead and run that job now, but it's it seems to be complaining about something. So let's take a look at what it's complaining about. So in this case, let's take a look at the log meter to see. If you hover over this, you'll see it's just a warning. All right. The warnings are not necessarily errors, but we always want to make sure we verify those warnings and resolve them. So I'll go ahead and click on that and see why it's having an issue. All right, so looking at this, I can clearly see that here we're talking about date. All right, and the DB type is missing. So we want to go ahead and give it the DB type so it knows. And this might be different for the different databases, so that it knows exactly what database type to use on the database. So here for date, I want to map that to a date time. For strings, I'm going to map that to a var. All right, and then you might just want to make sure that you do that for every single one of them. So I'm gonna pause the video. So I went ahead and confirmed that all the schema types were in place. So just to verify what we did. And if you're following along, you would definitely want to make sure that you have something very similar to this. So just making sure the data types are all matching for the DB, and it might be different for the different databases that you have. So date times, strings are varchars, longs are big int, and such. All right, and just doing that for all the other tables. And so this is it. This is what we have. Now we're gonna go ahead and run this, and this should create the tables for us, the schemas for us in our destination. So that ran successfully. If I come back to my AMC database in here and we refresh this database, now we see the three tables available for us. So the flow meter, the logs, and the statistics. All right, and then now we can start taking advantage of this within our jobs. Just to show as a very quick example, if I was to just create a new job here called demo 1 as an example to see how we can take advantage of this. This demo 1 will be a very simple T row generator to T log row. All right, as usual, we can go ahead, add first name, last name. Your job doesn't have to be as simple as this, but this is just for demonstration purposes. This is just for us to see how it all comes together. All right, so now I can see that my job is just gonna run. Okay, now it processed 100 rows, 100 records were processed. But what if I wanted to capture this information and have some volumetrics or some statistics around this all captured into the AMC? Now I can take advantage of my AMC tables that we created here. All right, the right techniques of doing this, I'm just gonna show the bare minimum technique. If you have any questions around this, let me know in the comment section below, and I might make a more detailed video around this. But the easy way for us is I can just go ahead and bring those components to the screen. All right, this is just the easy way. Make sure we enable those components, we activate them back. All right, once we activate them, now we are going to be since we're going to be capturing this information and writing to the tables, we can go ahead and retrieve schema from that table that we just created to make sure that we have those schemas available within the metadata. All right, so I want to bring back, so this is the three tables we created. I want to bring those schemas back for us. All right, now I have those tables here, so I can bring my flow meter back as I want it as an output, not an input. I can bring the logs, I want it as an output, not an input, and I can go ahead and bring the statistics, which I want as an output, not an input. All right, so now we can connect this, all of those. Do you want to get the schema of the target component? No, because the schema should really be the same. Let's go ahead and connect the logs. No, let's go ahead and connect the stats. And no, actually we should do this. Let's sync those columns here so that we have the exact same columns. All right, so now that we have that, now that we have this, if I run this job, it's going to capture this information for us and save it in the database. All right, in here I don't need to create those tables anymore because they exist already, so I can just simply take advantage of it. All right, this is one way of doing it. Another way would be which we can talk about a little bit later, is to use capture statistics from here as such, and then we can even take this into the project settings. All right, so that we can decide whether we're going to capture this from the project settings and such. And right from here, if we're going to a database, we can specify what database we're capturing this into. So this would be a better way of capturing this using the project settings as such, and then capturing your statistics or your logs and your volumetrics, which is basically the flow meter, and then writing that into whatever database we created. So let's say we had the repository database, I can just simply take advantage of that repository database and then specify those tables. So flow meter, actually that stats, just specify stats, logs, I believe that was the name, and then for meter we had it as a flow meter. All right, so this would be the very straightforward way of doing it, because then that way once I run this job, it captures all that information. So let's actually give it a try here. Let's just disable this for a second, we'll come back to it. So let's now, since we have those information captured and right into the database, let's actually capture statistics too as well. So now let's go back and run the job. So let's go ahead and run that basic job. All right, so now my job run, everything looks the way it should look normally. All right, but as an admin, we always want to get that metadata about what's going on from an operational perspective. So if I go back into my AMC, we should have captured some of this information. I don't think we'll have any errors, but we should have some other information that we might need. All right, so no flow meters because I didn't track that. Statistics, so we can see that we did capture the statistics of the job. I didn't have any logs, so that's why my logs are empty. Flow meter, I didn't capture flow meter. I didn't throw in a flow meter component. That's why this is empty. But you can see now I have information, about the statistics of this particular job, right? This is a job that ran, the job name, the job version, the context it used, how long it took for that job to run. And so all of this information, you can imagine having this in a very nice dashboard. There is a dashboard that shows all of this. I'm going to show that. But if you had your own custom dashboard, you can just simply take this data and visualize it. All right. I want to make this a little bit more interesting so that we can see some more data. So I'm going to bring in this component called the flow meter. All right, and I'm going to pass this job through that. And the reason for this is so that I can count the number of records that are coming through this particular component. All right, you might have a job that's processing files and you want to keep track. Is it how much records are we processing every single day? All right, if we expect to process 100 records and all of a sudden we're processing 10 million records, that could be a cause for concern. And the way we do that is by injecting this flow meter, so we have an idea of how much data we're processing. All right, so now we've done that, we've run that, and then we can go ahead, and on the other screen, I just did a refresh on the other screen here. Now we can verify that now I'm capturing information about my flow meter. All right, so you can see a count of 100 records are being processed. If I were to change this now and rerun this job with, say, 10,000 records as an example. All right, so if I were to change that and rerun the job with 10,000 records, let's run this job. While that's running, we're gonna bring this to the screen. So that job now run with 10,000 records. All right, if I go ahead and I refresh my my data, now you can see we've captured that information of being run with 10,000 records. There is still no logs. There is still no logs because we don't have any errors within this job. Let me see what we can do to get an error in here. Usually it's tricky to get errors. Let me see what I can do to force an error into this job. Let's what can we do? Just bear with me. It's easier to make things work than to cause errors, believe it or not, in this case. Let me see. Okay, so what I'll do here is I'm just gonna delete all of this. All right, so there'll be no input columns in there, but I'll say no. All right, so this is clearly an error. Hopefully this gives me an error. All right, it gives that error. All right, but but this is a very catastrophic error, which is not necessarily good. But either ways, you might have a scenario where you have an error, and I can't really produce an error here for us to see, believe it or not. But if you had an error, then that error will show up in our logs, in our logging area, because we can capture all of that information in here, the error message and the code and all of that. We can be able to capture that in here in that table. Now you might say, okay, how do we visualize? All right, I was just doing my Control-C, so we get back to a job. So how do we visualize this? All right, the way we visualize this is Talend does provide an out-of-the-box visualization perspective, which again is the AMC activity monitoring console. And the way we see that is just go into Windows, Perspective, and AMC. And this is only true, of course, with the enterprise version. So in here, I can go ahead and if we have the AMC set up, we can go ahead and select the project, and that AMC should show up in here. Just so in the AMC perspective, what we're noticing in here is, even though I have all that information showing up in the database, even though we've gone through and we can see all the information showing up in the database, what we want is to take advantage of that AMC perspective to visualize this data. But here in the AMC perspective, which I just came into, you're noticing that I don't have a project showing up in here, right? I should be able to select a project and be able to visualize what we have in that database. You can certainly use this, or you can use your own custom visualization. Now, the reason why we're not seeing any project in here is because we need to set this up within our preferences. So what we want to do to see that is to go back to Windows. In here, we want to select preferences. And then we want to select Activity Monitoring Console, which is the AMC. All right, if we expand that, what we need from the Activity Monitoring Console here is the data type. All right, so I'm going to go ahead, select that. And what is the source of that data type? In this case, we're using a database. All right, so I want to specify that that's the database. And there's a lot of information in here that you can specify, the number of days, how much information you want to visualize. So I'll just keep that as the default. If you had it stored to files, you can simply point to the files here, right? But since we have it stored to a database, I'm just going to go ahead, add a new database, call it Talend AMC. That's the name. All right. And then in this case, we're simply just providing the information to that database where we have it stored. Unfortunately, you cannot pull the database that you have from your repository here, so we just have to put this in, type this in manually. All right, JDBC parameters, we don't really need that. Host is localhost, so everything looks good. Let's test that. That's good. All right. And then let's go ahead and click next. What are the table names? So we just want to match those tables because we're basically reading that information and visualizing. So we want to use the same table names. For flow meter, I think we call that stats, and we call that logs, and we call that flow meter. All right, you're more than welcome to use this to actually select the tables themselves. But since I knew the names, I can just go ahead and type them in. All right, so let's finish that. And now we do have our AMC database showing up in here. So now it knows where to go look for AMC in order to use. So let's apply that and close. Now immediately you see that my AMC perspective now it does show a project. So it does show a project for us. So what I can do now is select that project. I have a single database. I have a single project in here. If you had multiple projects, you can definitely see those multiple projects. Now, within that, I can see now those jobs, the detailed jobs. All right. And then it shows me a very beautiful dashboard of all the information. If you remember in the video, we ran a job that had processed a few records, and then it processed a lot of records. So we can see the execution time in here. We can see thresholds. We can see, the volume of the job if you want to see how much records it processed. So we can see all of that here visualized. All right, so I think we did 500 records earlier and then did about 10,000 records. And so you have a dashboard here, a trending dashboard, and you can quickly see what's going on with your jobs, right? From an operational perspective, if we expect 500 records and all of a sudden we're getting 1,000 records, we can put in some notifications around here to really alert and inform us about the health of our jobs. And all of that information is just a visualization that is being pulled from the AMC database here as well. Plus, if say you're not happy with the visualization for some reason, which I don't see why, if you're not happy with that visualization, you're always welcome. I've had scenarios where for one reason or another, you might maybe take advantage of something like Power BI, and with just a little bit of SQL queries, you can put your own visualization on top of that. I think I have Power BI here loading. You can go ahead and put your own visualization. Let me check if I have some examples here to show. Let me just verify my my projects. I used to have some examples that I can show. Okay. Yes, so I do have some examples in here for custom visualization, and this is a custom visualization that you can throw on, you can use, you know, Power BI, MicroStrategy, Tableau, because we're just putting all this information from a database. You can then put your own custom dashboard to show you errors, to show you what job is running, how long the job took, and this gives you very, very powerful operational dashboard on top of your AMC activity monitoring database within Talend. All right, guys, so this brings us to the end of this presentation. I hope it was helpful. I hope this was very helpful. If you have any questions, with the presentation, don't hesitate to let me know in the comment section below. Again, we've answered several questions, the key of which is how to create AMC tables for any Talend version to any database. We use MySQL as an example. You can use Oracle, Microsoft. That always works, or even Snowflake, or any cloud database, that still works, right? As long as we can establish connection to those databases. In addition to that, we also show how to enable the AMC perspective. If it's missing from your studio environment, you can go ahead and enable that. And then last but not least, as a bonus, we went ahead and show how to actually do your own custom visualization on top of the AMC database that we created to even take it to the next level. Thanks for watching. Through here, I will see you in the next video.